Response to Russia. The U.S. evicts dozens of Russian diplomats following the poisoning of a former Moscow spy on British soil. We have the latest. March for Our Lives. Hundreds of thousands across the country protest over the weekend to end gun violence. We caught up with Catholics taking part. Reaching out. Young people from around the world deliver a message to the Pope about the Church. We have a report from Rome. And bouncing along. Loyola Chicago, cheered on by Sister Jean Schmidt, makes it to the Final Four. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 26, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The U.S. is kicking Russian spies out of the country. The Trump administration says 60 intelligence officers under the cover as Russian diplomats will be expelled, and a Russian consulate in Seattle will be closed. It's punishment for Moscow's alleged role in poisoning one of its own former intelligence officers in Britain. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. This is reportedly the largest expulsion of Russian intelligence officers in U.S. history. The poisoning of an ex-Russian spy and his daughter on British soil has left the two unconscious and in critical condition. More than a dozen other countries have joined the U.S. in retaliation by expelling Russian diplomats. The White House says it's sending Moscow a clear message: actions have consequences.
The poisoning in the UK that has kind of led to today's announcement was a very brazen action. It was a reckless action. It endangered not just two individuals who were poisoned, but many civilians, many innocent civilians. And this is not the type of conduct that the United States or allies can accept.
The Trump administration now gives the Russian consulate in Seattle 7 days to close up shop. The White House says the location of the consulate is a concern due to its close proximity to a U.S. submarine base and a Boeing facility. Among the number of diplomats being expelled are a dozen who were posted at Russia's mission to the United Nations. Administration officials say they were engaged in aggressive collection of intelligence on American soil. Russia has denied any involvement in the UK poisoning, and the Kremlin has suggested it will expel an equal number of U.S. diplomats from Russia in response. The White House says the president remains open to working with the Russians in areas of mutual concern. Wyatt?
Okay, we'll continue to follow this and see if Russia does indeed expel the same number of diplomats on our end. White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. President Trump announces an order banning most transgender troops from serving in the military, except under limited circumstances. The White House says the new rules will disqualify, quote, transgender persons with a history or diagnosis of gender dysphoria, saying they pose a considerable risk to military effectiveness. President Trump rescinded his previous position, which was challenged in federal court, to make room for the new policy. Hundreds of thousands of young people took to the streets in Washington and across the United States over the weekend. They're calling for an end to gun violence and change in the nation's gun laws. The crowds turning out in huge numbers for Saturday's March for Our Lives. They want tougher laws against weapons and ammo after a school shooting left 17 dead in Parkland, Florida last month. Young people also marched in Boston, New York, Chicago, Houston, Minneapolis, and Los Angeles. Many Catholic groups joined the crowds flooding Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington in an act of solidarity. Before hitting the streets, students from Catholic schools gathered to pray.
Together, we will never forget these victims, and through voting and marching, we will work to ensure this country is governed from a place of love and respect.
At St. Patrick's Catholic Church in downtown Washington, students from Catholic schools in the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area discussed the impact of gun violence.
It's been pretty sad to hear constantly the stories about the school shootings and stuff.
This could happen to me, this could happen to my friends, this could happen to anyone, so something definitely needs to happen.
Lucas Portez of Olney, Maryland recalls a school shooting at a high school in his state where a 16-year-old was shot by a classmate. Pro-lifers tell us they wanted to make their presence known at the march, carrying signs like pro-life for the whole life.
I'm here because I believe that God made us in his image and that violence is wrong and that the loss of human life is wrong, and that if we have the power to work for a society where that's less likely to happen, and that's something we have an moral obligation to do.
Some Catholic bishops took to Twitter to express their support for participants in the march. Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston saying, "We join people throughout the United States in the effort to end gun violence in our schools, homes, places of worship, work, and neighborhoods." Bishop Bill Wack of Pensacola, Tallahassee adding, "It's good to see so many young people raising their voices against gun violence, just as it is inspiring to see them at the March for Life every year. We must be pro-life in all of life's beautiful forms and stages. God, give us the gift of peace." The March for Our Lives targeted lawmakers, especially Republicans. One sign even challenged the faith of a Catholic senator. Correspondent Jason Calvi reports from Capitol Hill, where Congress is on a 2-week Easter recess. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. Protesters had specific demands from members of Congress. They want a ban on assault weapons, a limit to the number of bullets in a gun's magazine, and an end to background check loopholes. Students came from across America, including the city where the Florida massacre took place, all saying the time for change is now.
In the flood of marchers, Parkland student Lexi Angel says she came to support her school.
The big part of the March for Our Lives is to help young people be able to go out and vote. So, like my poster says, we will vote, we will rise.
Rising up to call for new laws.
I'm out here for the future kids in America. I'm out here for the restriction of gun laws.
Some slam Senator Marco Rubio, a Republican from Florida, for taking campaign cash from the NRA. OpenSecrets.org estimates that number is more than $3 million.
I'm going to start off by putting this price tag right here as a reminder for you guys to know how much Marco Rubio took for every student's life in Florida. $1.05.
One marcher held up this banner, questioning Rubio's legitimacy as a Catholic, with a blood red cross on his forehead.
Home is where the heart is.
A reference to the Parkland school shooting on Ash Wednesday 2018, when 17 people were killed. That caused controversy among Catholics.
Marco Rubio was caught up in a reasonable middle ground Catholic approach that wasn't heard by the ideologues.
Chad Pecknold, a professor of theology, says the attack on Rubio as a Catholic is not fair.
The Catholic, I think, has a commitment to defend just laws and to defend the right to self-defense, and also has a commitment to defend our children. And so I think the Catholic is, in a sense, the one with no natural party here. We actually have to commend the common good, and we have to be reasonable in the policies that we pursue.
Senator Rubio praised the marchers for exercising their First Amendment rights, but Rubio also defended Americans who support the right to bear arms. He says they also want to stop mass shootings. The senator says gun bans won't prevent these tragedies. Wyatt?
Jason, I understand other controversial groups, including Planned Parenthood, backed the march.
That's right, Wyatt. Planned Parenthood actually tweeted in support of the march. They wrote, "Everyone has the right to lead a life that is healthy and free from violence." Now, that got a lot of backlash from pro-lifers who challenged the abortion giant, saying they literally commit violence against the unborn every single day.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. Joining us now to talk more about the march and its impact is Jarrett Stepman, editor for the Daily Signal. Jarrett, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You were there at the march, and you also wrote an article highlighting 7 takeaways. Just give me a brief summary of what your impressions were.
Absolutely. I think this was, in many ways, a very partisan march. I think some of the narratives, the national narratives, that this is kind of an all-encompassing march, that, you know, we're fighting against school violence. But what I saw there was a lot of left-wing groups that had gathered, such as Planned Parenthood, which I think has partially organized the event, which was very, very well organized. They had signs that essentially said, no more thoughts, no more prayers, only action. So I think you saw a lot of partisan takes from the part of the people in the crowd and the audience. People going after, say, Republicans, definitely a lot against President Donald Trump saying to impeach. So the idea that this is a nonpartisan gathering, I think, wasn't quite true, and maybe a lot of people who came there thought it was, but certainly the tenor of this was that there was a lot of left-wing groups that had gathered for various causes, all there for gun control.
I know that was concerning for so many pro-life Americans who showed up there and didn't realize what it was going to be like. You had mentioned some of the signs that you saw. I want to highlight one of them because you took a picture of the sign saying, "Stop making laws to control my body, make laws to control your guns." So tell me a little bit more about the link between the gun control movement and the pro-abortion movement.
Yeah, there was an interesting level of people there who basically were attacking pro-life people for not being also for gun rights, essentially. So there were a lot of people that had attacks on pro-life individuals saying that, well, your views are incompatible. So I think the message there was, again, there were a lot of signs there for Planned Parenthood and other groups like this that are generally very much against the pro-life message, and those with traditional values and things like that was very prevalent.
You say that the march was well organized and well funded. What do we know about those who did fund and were behind it?
There were a huge number of celebrities, for instance, Oprah Winfrey, George Clooney, MoveOn.org, which is funded by a liberal billionaire, George Soros, was a part of this. It was very clear from being there that this is a highly organized and well-funded event. I think some of the narratives is that this is a children's organized campaign, but really there were a lot of adults involved. A lot of money was involved in the organization. There was not something that could have been created by merely a group of children.
Of the specific measures protesters are asking for, and they're asking for a whole lot of different things, what realistically do you think can be accomplished?
Well, honestly, I don't think a lot is going to be moved as far as gun control, which is, of course, the tenor of these things. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion about issues relating to mental health and school discipline, which are other issues that are involved when we talk about shootings on campuses. I think that is something that was very much missing from this debate. It was almost entirely focused on gun control as an issue, which is, of course, an issue that has very strong battle lines in this country. This debate has been going on for a very long time. So I think they want to move the ball. I think they want to make groups like the NRA, the National Rifle Association, seem like extremists that are out on the fringe. But those represent a large part of Americans who, I think when they see signs that say we should end the Second Amendment there, a lot of these groups are going to dig in their heels and say, we're not going to budge from our point of view and move over to yours.
And of course, Congress has gone now on a 2-week recess for Easter, so not immediate response out of a lot of representatives, but we'll continue to see what their reaction is, especially as they come back, and if there's any policy changes at all. That. Jared Stetman, editor for the Daily Signal, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
At least 64 people, many of them children, are dead after a fire in a shopping mall in Russia. The building in Siberia was packed with kids at the time. It was the first weekend of a school recess. Witnesses say they did not hear any fire alarms. Officials confirm they will launch a criminal probe. Pope Francis says in a telegram he is deeply saddened by the loss of life. Egyptians head to the polls today in a presidential election, but experts say the winner is a foregone conclusion. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is expected to win a second 4-year term. His only challenger joined the race at the last minute. Critics say it's a sign the country is sliding back to authoritarian rule of the 1950s. Officials are hoping for a large turnout. The country has 60 million eligible voters. A Vatican news agency says more than 4,000 Christian families have returned to Iraq. Even more are expected once the school year ends. The refugees have been coming home since the Iraqi government declared victory over ISIS last year. Mexico's Senate approves a bill allowing doctors to refuse to perform an abortion on moral grounds. It still must be signed into law, but the country's Anti-Discrimination Council says it threatens the patient's rights. Abortion is legal in Mexico City, but outlawed in many other parts of Mexico. Catholics in France honor the 4 people killed in Friday's terror attack, including a policeman who died after swapping places with a hostage. Bishop Alain Pellet says the whole country is touched by the extraordinary devotion of Colonel Arnaud Beltrame, a practicing Catholic. The Catholic Herald reports he was given last rites and was married to his longtime girlfriend in the moments before he died. There will be a national memorial for him on Wednesday. Pope Francis urges young people to make their voices heard.
Far tacere I giovani è una tentazione che è sempre esistita.
At his Sunday Mass in Rome, the Holy Father asked youth to be like those who praised Jesus during his Palm Sunday procession and not like those who called for his crucifixion. Young Catholics say they want a more transparent church where women play a greater leadership role. Young people from around the world presented Pope Francis with a document after a week-long conference at the Vatican. The letter says in part, "We need a church that is welcoming and merciful." Chris Russo is a research technologist from Boston. He took part in the pre-synod meetings and joins us now from Rome. So Chris, you helped write this letter to the Holy Father. What is the central message and what role women should play in the church, do you think?
The central message behind this document and really the synod in general is that the Holy Father, he called youth and young adults together because he wanted to hear directly from us. And the central message of the document is that youth and young adults, we desire the church to be close to us, to be near to us as we walk on the path of discernment and become closer to Christ. So to have the church walk with us and guide us through major milestones in life. And then as far as the role of women in the church, the document and I believe the whole consensus of the people that I participated in this pre-synod with is that we believe that the role of women is extremely important and that they play a vital role in helping youth and young adults discern their vocations.
Sure. Well, like you say, the Pope says he wants to listen to young people as the Vatican prepares for this Youth Synod, which will be happening in October. So how did the overall experience go of being there at the Vatican, and do you think your ideas were heard?
To say the very least, it was an absolute honor to participate in this event, and I believe that all of us were heard. The Holy Father said pretty clearly that when we have a synod that's focused on youth and young adults, it would be pointless just to talk about youth and young adults without directly hearing from them. So I believe that my voice was heard along with the voice of the world, and it was a very humbling experience to be a part of this process and to learn that the Catholic Church is not just something that's in the United States, but that is global, and that everyone has a different experience within the Church throughout the world.
As a young Catholic, what do you hope comes out of the Synod in October? What do you think would be a goal?
I believe that the best outcome would be for the Church to encourage the bishops to have more support of priests so that they can better accompany youth and young adults on their path towards discernment and a closer relationship with Christ. That was another central message with this document is that formation of both religious and lay people within the church and lay leaders is important as far as guiding youth and young adults.
Sure, and it sounds like such an important event, this pre-synod meeting and being able to engage with young people. And of course, we'll continue to follow the developments as leading up to the synod in October. Chris Russo, participant in the pre-synod, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, we talk with a pro-life activist who is fighting for the unborn in Africa. And a timely reminder, a new faith-based movie about the life of St. Paul. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. 40 Days for Life is a Lenten campaign asking mothers to choose life over abortion. Results are still coming in, but officials say at least 490 babies have been saved. They say in many cases, the mothers changed their minds after seeing people on the sidewalk outside an abortion clinic praying for them. Another initiative to promote a global culture of life is taking place at the United Nations. The Holy See Mission is sponsoring a session devoted to women and girls in Africa. Lauren Ashburn sat down earlier this month with a pro-life advocate from Africa who is on the front lines of this battle.
Obianuju Akocha joins us now. She is founder and president of Culture of Life Africa, where you promote African values for life. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
And congratulations on your UN speech. You were there as part of the mission, the Holy See mission. As protesters and women surround the UN talking about rural women, why was it important for you to come and speak?
Now, this is an opportunity the Holy See gave us to have this panel on ideological colonization. Actually, that was the theme that the Holy See chose how rural women are able to survive and how their development is dealt with in the era of ideological colonization.
Which means that Western aid comes in and puts its values down onto the African people.
Exactly. So it was really very important for the Holy See to bring their voice to this kind of forum where it's not usual to have the voice of reason. Many times it's just women speaking about, abortion rights, contraception rights, sexual and reproductive health and rights.
Family planning, right?
Family planning, the usual stuff. But the Holy See mission to the United Nations decided to come up with this theme and this topic to bring this voice onto the UN floor. So it's very important.
Tell me about women in Africa and their commitment to life. 80% of the countries have some sort of restriction on abortion.
That's right. So out of the 54 African countries, only about 4 of them have legalized abortion. Every other country in Africa now has restrictions and prohibitions. Even the 2 countries that I can count have restrictions against abortion in their own constitutions. So the African people are overwhelmingly pro-life. Even when polls have been taken, Pew Research has done polls years ago and found out some of the countries as high as 80-something%, 90-something% of the people say that they are against abortion under any circumstance.
Plus, the Catholic Church there is growing in leaps and bounds. We can't keep up with the population, and there's a priest shortage. I think it's like 200 million Catholics in Africa.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you about Melinda Gates. She has said that it's better to provide Africans with contraception and artificial methods of birth control in order to save women's lives because they would die in childbirth. How do you think that money should be spent? Is that the right way to do it?
There is no evidence of that, actually, because there are countries in Africa that actually have a low prevalence of contraception use, who actually have very good maternal health status. Their maternal mortality rates are very low. So, and then there are other countries like Zimbabwe where the contraception usage is already very high, and yet they are failing on every indicator concerning women's health and maternal health care. So that there is no evidence for what she says, and I don't believe that bringing contraception to African women, I mean, by the way, they already have contraception, but then what African women would need would be things like education. They would need access to basic health care. They would need access to food, to water. About 30% of the African population do not have access to clean drinking water, for example, and this is basic facts that everybody can have access to. But yet, they're talking about contraception more and more, and then taking attention away and distracting from real issues that affect the ordinary man, woman, and child in Africa.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your perspective.
Thank you for having me on.
And our thanks to Lauren Ashburn for that interview. Landmarks around the world went dark on Saturday to mark the annual Earth Hour. In Rome, the Colosseum was plunged into darkness with the help of a veteran Italian astronaut. And from the City of Lights with the Eiffel Tower to New Delhi's iconic India Gate War Memorial, all in an effort to raise awareness about climate change. And in the U.S., the Empire State Building took part. Up next, Movie with a Message. A new film about St. Paul is out in theaters now. And Loyola Chicago and their biggest cheerleader. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The Archdiocese of Newark says a law barring religious cemeteries from selling their own headstones is unjust. But Catholic officials say they will not appeal the court ruling last month. The judge says the lawsuit by the Archdiocese and 2 parishioners failed to show a constitutional violation. A new faith-based movie opened on Friday just ahead of Holy Week.
You risked people looking to me before Christ.
The day I heard you preach, my God, I saw Christ in you. There are men, women, children that will never meet you.
Paul, Apostle of Christ, stars Jim Caviezel as St. Luke and James Faulkner in the title role. Caviezel says the film is dedicated to people in the present day who are being persecuted for their faith. For more on this movie, including interviews with the actors and directors from the opening in Dallas, please visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. A couple of Texans have arrived in Washington, D.C. after a drive across the country. Their goal is to meet President Trump, but what's unusual, one of them is a 43-year-old lifelong Democrat, and the other is a 93-year-old Republican.
I have a cousin here that's with me. He's kind of on the fence, and on the fence, and I'd just like have him meet the president too, and I think from then on he's going to be a changed man.
Francis Varner and Brian Mealer are calling their 1,800-mile road trip across the divide. Mealer says they disagree on a lot of issues and have been arguing all the way to Washington, but they agree on the political climate in Washington must change, and they want leaders to compromise and, quote, grow up. And finally tonight, Loyola Chicago is headed to the Final Four after beating Kansas State on Saturday, and their 98-year-old team chaplain was front and center. Sister Jean Schmidt has been with the team since 1994. She prays with players and coaches before the games. The Ramblers are only the fourth number 11 seed to make it to the Final Four. They will play Michigan on Saturday. Another Catholic school, Villanova, plays Kansas in the other semifinal. And with that, we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. We'll leave you tonight with more scenes of Palm Sunday around the world. Good night, and God bless.